Start then now. So yeah, welcome everyone. This is one of LIS's latest short courses, Reputation and Risk, Business Critical Lessons from the Surface and Dark Web, which is going to be led by Mark Frankel, who is doing the info session today. Mark has 25 years experience in broadcast and digital media and is a former BBC News journalist as well. So very interesting background and has lots of cool insights to share on this course. And I'm sure he'll explain further. If you have any questions during the session, just pop them into the Q&A, or if you feel more comfortable raising your hand at the end, that's fine as well. We'll try our best to get to everybody. So yeah, Mark, take it away.
Thanks very much, Ronnie, and really good to see so many of you on this call. I hope that you're going to find this interesting and useful. I will give you about 10-15 minutes of overview of what to expect. And then, as Ronnie says, there'll be plenty of time for questions afterwards. So I think probably the best place to start is for me to say, why this course? Why now? What are we doing? The dark web is a mysterious place. Some of you may be more familiar with it than others, but why would we want to, or why would LIS want to do a course about this, and why now? And I think really the answer to this is largely to do with the environment that we're all inhabiting these days. As you can see from the screen grab that's on the screen there, most of us inhabit a world that is largely driven by conversations and interactions on the surface web. And by that, I mean, you go onto Google, you might go onto Bing, you might, you use your browser of choice to search up things on a day-to-day basis. But that's only really a tiny fraction of the internet. It's a small fraction of what's out there. And this is really the first of its kind as a university course. I don't think any other college, tertiary education institute in the country is offering something quite like this. And what we're trying to do here is to give you some insight and introduction to the millions, and I emphasize it is millions of people who are spending time in parts of the internet that we simply don't inhabit on a day-to-day basis. As you can see on the screen grab, there is the surface, the deep, and the dark web. Just to briefly give you an introduction to this, as I said, the surface web is where you probably spend most of your time. The deep web is that space on the internet where you probably have spent a bit of time if you're working on encrypted software of some kind. For example, you need to go through two-stage authentication to get into internet banking. Or if, for example, you are looking to do some academic work and you are looking to access journals that are behind a paywall or behind a protected firewall of some kind, you would probably be entering into the deep web. So some of us, probably the majority of us at some time, have spent time in parts of the deep web. The dark web, however, is a part of the internet where things are relayed and encrypted to a far greater degree. They're far more anonymized. It is a far more mysterious place, and where there are hidden conversations. Some of these conversations are of a nefarious nature, involving criminal activity, and there are as many law enforcement officers as there may be people trying to peddle things that we may not want to come across. But there are also people there who are trying to buy, sell, and converse about things that they can't do in an open way. They could be, for example, people who've been evicted. They don't have a fixed address. They could be, for example, people with mental health issues and don't want to be tracked for reasons of connected to their mental health. They could also be people who are, for one reason or another, not interested in being seen and being tracked in a standardized way on the internet when it comes to discussing goods and services. So they're not necessarily up to no good. Unfortunately, some of them are, but a large number of them are doing perfectly legal things, involved in perfectly interesting and legal activities, and discussing businesses, services. It could be anything from the state of the health service to a retail product, to a luxury brand, and they're talking about their experiences of those goods and services in an anonymized way. So during the course of this particular course, one of the things that we will look at is how business reputation is evolving in these spaces. And the course is looking from the surface to the dark web. So we will look as much at communities on Reddit and Discord, gaming communities, for example, sub-communities of interest there, as we will look at some of the darknet forums that exist in those anonymized spaces that I've just mentioned. Since the pandemic, a lot of these spaces have become more prominent in people's lives. I think one of the things that the COVID-19 pandemic did for all of us is it reawakened our attitude to privacy. That, in combination perhaps with some of the problems that Mark Zuckerberg and his fellow tech billionaires faced with the Cambridge Analytica scandal that some of you will have heard of, and some of the issues that surrounded Meta in the aftermath of that scandal, have led millions of people to go from the open source social media platforms that we were perhaps most familiar with in the sort of 1.0 social media universe to the 2.0 universe that we now inhabit, where WhatsApp has become a platform of choice for most people. Telegram and Signal are being widely used as well. So one of the things that I will discuss in some detail in this course is that pivot to those invitation-only platforms. What do they mean for our lives? How do we interact in them successfully? How do we ensure that we remain safe whilst also getting valuable information from those conversations? I will be joined on this course by two fantastic academic colleagues in James Carney and Dr. Michael Englard there that you see on the screen. Michael is LIS's registrar, but he's also done a great deal of research into risk, and particularly around the subject of risk when it comes to communities of different kinds. So Michael will join us to talk about the different narratives that surround risk in these communities. James is a computational linguist and a real expert on the dark net, and he and I have spoken quite a bit already about this, and he will take one of the sessions specifically introducing you all to the economy of the dark net. How big is it? How interrelated are all the networks on it? How do we navigate the dark net safely and securely? So he will specifically look at that space, and I will then look more broadly at some of the narratives, some of the communities of interest that we can explore in more detail once James has done that initial setup for us. So it's a truly interdisciplinary course involving the three of us in different ways, and hopefully you'll get a lot from us all. As you can see there from the overview, we start with a really important safety and verification session. That's to ensure that everyone is properly set up. They have the VPNs, the virtual private networks, established on their profiles. You have anonymous profiles that allow you to be able to surf and lurk safely in these communities without being abused and disrupted. We'll talk about how to verify content there. I'll go through some hopefully useful and interesting open source investigation techniques in that initial day. And then we move on to the sort of meat of the course, if you like, with James's session on the dark social web in week 2. And then weeks 3 and 4, the online sessions will look at countercultural narratives, the discourse of these particular communities, how we understand how conversations play out differently to how we might expect them in more obvious and open networks. And then risk mitigation and brand reputation. I've got some really interesting examples of how brands have been disrupted and businesses have been disrupted in different ways in some of these communities. The final week we'll dedicate to presentations and some of what you've discovered for yourself, because this is a really interactive and practical course, and I'm going to give you lots of time to explore these communities for yourself so that you can then come back and show us and show the rest of the group what you've learned and hopefully discovered for yourself. And that last week we'll focus specifically on that. Learning outcomes in a nutshell, I am convinced that out of this course, you will all have a much better understanding of the darknet, the communities that exist within them, the forums of conversation that are there, and specifically and practically be able to apply that to your day jobs. What I'm really keen that we can get out of this course isn't just a sort of academic background in what exists, but also how can you take what you learnt in these 5 weeks and apply it to your businesses, to your organizations, to your day-to-day work, so that you can help, whether it's your marketing team, your strategic comms teams, your product teams, reorientate them to understand how your business, how your organization is being discussed, and the conversations that exist around them in different ways that perhaps you were less familiar with before the course began. So there's some really good practical transferable skills that I hope you'll all be able to take from the course to apply to your day jobs afterwards. Okay, that I think gives you a nutshell of what we're planning to do in this 5 weeks of training. I'm sure there are loads of questions. I can talk for hours on this subject, but I want to give you enough time, as there's a large number of you on this call, to be able to ask questions. So I'm going to hand back to you, Michael, and see where we want to start.
Yeah, so if anybody is looking to ask Mark a question, feel free to put your hand up or just unmute. Any questions at all are welcome.
Just looking around down the chat to see if we've got anyone in the chat that wanted to ask something.
Mark, may I ask a question?
Of course, yeah.
So, at least as far as I'm aware, I've never gone on the dark web. What kind of communities might one discover there that one would be comfortable lurking in? Just to give a feel for, someone who hasn't engaged in this before.
Sure, good question. So you're right, there are communities that you would not want to lurk in, or perhaps you'd feel uncomfortable in, particularly related to, guns, hard drugs, pornography, and so forth. But there are a lot of others that it's rather like, the best way of explaining it, Mark, is it's a slice of the same internet, but where people are talking more freely about a whole range of subjects. So, for example, yesterday I was lurking in a forum on counterfeiting of luxury brands, just to get an idea of how various brands' products were being distributed, sold, and discussed on the internet. So there you've got a forum where people were looking to trade in counterfeit goods. They were all legitimate goods, but they were talking about the defects or otherwise of those goods and how they were attracted to them for various reasons. That might be one example. There is another group in another forum there where people were discussing pharmaceutical goods and what they might be able to buy in various darknet markets. Now, we're not talking about, heroin and cocaine here. We're talking about sleeping pills, and the kind of things that you would potentially be able to buy with a doctor's prescription. But these are largely people who, for a variety of reasons, are not registered with a local GP. And so they're talking about those goods in the way that they might want to talk to their local GP. And the other thing, actually, interestingly, that I bring into the course is there are a number of doctors, medical professionals, who have set themselves up on the dark web to talk to people about drugs of various kinds and how to keep themselves safe, recognizing that these people are unable to get standard medical assistance. And so they've made themselves available to these forums. So that's a really fascinating environment, and one that we will look at in some detail as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so there's a few questions in the chat there. One from Louise, could you give us a breakdown of age groups, etc., on the dark web?
Okay, so I'm just trying to find Louise's question. So Louise, you're asking, could you give us a breakdown of age groups? Okay. Yeah, I mean, what's interesting, Louise, is that it's a real variety. At the moment, figures are really hard to come by because anonymized data being what it, as you would imagine on the darknet, people don't tend to reveal themselves very clearly. We know from a number of reputable surveys that there's about 4.5 million active daily users on the darknet, of whom, interestingly, a large proportion are in Germany and the US. The largest proportion of dark web users are in Germany. There's about 200,000 daily users in this country alone, well over 500,000 in the US. And there are lots that are using what's called bridge servers to get onto the darknet. And they were particularly if you're looking in places like Russia, Iran, parts of the world where internet access is more restricted. That data is harder to come by. They're using what's called these sort of bridge relay servers to get on. We know that the age groups will vary from people in their 50s and 60s to people who are fresh out of school, frankly. So you've got people who are quite experienced. They are engineers. The other really interesting thing is that there are literally thousands of people on the darknet who have set themselves up as engineers and IT specialists, knowing that they can get more lucrative work that way. So, for example, if you're a business and you're really struggling to get somebody who really knows their way around the internet to build new products, for example, you're interested in building a new AI product, some of the smartest brains are actually on the dark web, but you need to know where to find them. And so you'll find that people in their 20s and 30s who've got PhDs from MIT and Harvard and the like are actually discussing their work in dark web forums, because they're actually finding it more useful and interesting to be there than on the surface web. So one of the things I think businesses can learn from a lot is how to find the right kind of personnel for their workforce in those communities, and how to potentially to advertise in those spaces.
Can I ask about misinformation, and is there a lot of peddling of misinformation and fake news and all this sort of thing in there, as much as people setting themselves up to help people who can't access?
Yes. So like you'd expect in all aspects of the net, of the internet, there is a degree of mis and disinformation, and there are people who are deliberately peddling in malware and so forth in order to trade in malware code that people could apply to disrupt other businesses. So there's nefarious practices, as I said at the beginning. Interestingly, though, what you tend to find in the dark web is a degree of honesty that you don't find on the surface web, because you've got the psychology of people there is to understand the truth or to get to the reality of what is going on. So you don't tend to find as much of that kind of just rubbish that you would find in so many open source internet platforms, because it tends to be taken down very quickly or disparaged very quickly. There's a much lower threshold for tolerance of mis and disinformation on the dark web. So people who tend to peddle it, and I'm talking this is beyond the malware and the hackervists and so on, will be targeted very quickly and taken down very quickly.
But isn't there a high proportion of conspiracy theorists by its very nature of what it is, that you'd have people less amenable to sometimes to the truth, and rather do you see what I mean?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I wouldn't necessarily say that there's a higher proportion of conspiracy theories. I think there are definitely people who are who will be interested in conspiracies. My experience to date has been the conspiracy theorists tend to be quite roundly attacked quite quickly on the darknet, or at least they will be, people around them will be very quick to ask them for evidence of what they're saying. So it is interesting. You know, I've spent as much time in Reddit forums as I have on the Dread forum, which is probably one of the largest darknet forums. And I've seen far more conspiracy theories peddled on Reddit than I have on Dread. And I think that's largely because of the tolerance factor in those communities.
Thanks, Louise. We'll move on to another question there from Peter Tarley. Can you talk about the in-person sessions, dates, logistics, and whether it's essential to be physically present or can it do remotely? So this is something, Mark, you can elaborate, that we have been discussing. I think we possibly will be moving the first day to online and then having the last day as optional.
Yeah, I thought it was the other way around actually, but anyway, we can discuss that. But yeah, the principle of this course is primarily online, and that's to allow for flexibility and hybrid learning, and for you guys to feel that you don't need to, you know, trek into central London to do the course. And I'm very comfortable with that. Everything we do, you can do from a computer screen, and I'll be sharing lots of interactive resources and so forth. The first session, which is really about setting you all up and making sure that we all understand some of the risks and issues involved. We were keen to see if we could get people together at the LIS campus in Aldwych if possible. If that's really impossible for you, I'm sure we can make it work by having some people in person, some people online. The following 3 weeks will all be online. And then the last session, I think, is optional. We can do it online, but again, if people can be there in person, or we can all meet for a drink afterwards, maybe, whatever, you know, the interest levels are, I'm comfortable with that too. Essentially, there's nothing that we're going to be discussing that can't be done in this online forum, but it's quite nice to have a bit of human-to-human contact at the beginning and the end if we can. The sessions themselves from weeks 2 to 4, 2, 3, and 4 are all 90 minutes and over a sort of lunchtime period to make it easier for everyone. The first day is a slightly longer session. We'll have a couple of hours in the morning and a couple of hours in the afternoon. And then the final day, I think, is a couple of hours in the afternoon on a Friday afternoon. That's what we have planned.
Great, thanks for that question, Peter. So yeah, there's another question there from Kyle, just mentioning that they're interested in LIS in general and the programs, and if this will be done in the future. I guess this is the pilot course of our DAC Web short course. So we'll see if it will be done again in the future, and then we'll reach out and let you know if that happens. Yes, there were some questions about the cost. Maybe Mike, do you want to take over and let everyone know?
Oh, I think you're on mute, Mike. Still on mute.
No.
Better.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Cool. So the program itself is 5 weeks. Obviously, as Mark spoke just now, but the delivery is hybrid, but obviously it can be done mostly online. The actual fees itself is £2,000 plus VAT, but there are exceptions to this. There are discounts available for self-funders, people who work for non-profits, and people who work for startups, essentially. So if it is a program that you'd be interested in and you're either concerned about the fees, if you're not able to pay the complete fee, do just get in touch. You can drop an inquiry on this webpage. You can get here by going to professional courses up here, and it's the risk and reputation over here. On this page, you can just submit an inquiry and it'll be picked up by our team, and you can have a call with somebody and talk through your options. So yeah.
Great. There's
I was
another
also
question.
just going to say, just very briefly, that there's not a huge amount of reading involved. This is a very practical course, and I deliberately made it as such. There will be a little bit of reading that and some resource materials that I'll also make available to everybody week to week, and you'll be able to see as you embark on the course. And obviously, if you want to go deeper into the course, I can suggest other things for people to look at to, you know, if they want to go even deeper into the literature. But this is largely about, you know, practical applications.
Yeah, there's just a final question there if you want to touch briefly on this, Mark, about the conversations on the dark web around mental health or for mental health reasons. It's a final question there if you want to take that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. I mean, mental health is a big element of dark web interactivity of different kinds. You often get people who are, you know, for various reasons have particular needs, or they're being, they feel, for a variety of reasons, like they are distrustful of authority. They could have ended up in a position in the recent past where they've fallen out with somebody. They could have, as I said before, been evicted. They could have had a prior drugs issue, or a prior felony of some kind, or conviction of some kind, which has meant it's harder for them to interact on the surface web and in open forums. That doesn't delegitimize any of their activity, but it is something that is very prevalent amongst different communities. And it's something that we will talk about as we embark on this course, how to ensure that you don't disrupt vulnerable people, that you're mindful of where they're coming from or what they might have experienced. I should say that most of what we're going to do in this course is about lurking in these communities rather than having lots of very direct conversations. The reason for that is partly to protect you all from, you know, getting into difficult conversations, and also because of time and the fact that, you know, it would be very hard to build up, you know, deep and meaningful relationships in a 5-week period. But yes, vulnerability and mental health is a big part of what these communities are all about.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so we're near the end. Mike just is going to run through a bit of information about the application, just in case anybody is interested.
Onto the website, you can submit an inquiry if you've got a question, and that will be picked up by our team. However, after this session, if you are ready to apply, no payment is needed immediately. So you can just scroll down and then click on this button over here, apply now. And then there's a few questions there. If you need any help with any of those questions or answering them, feel free to, again, to just submit an inquiry and we'll be there to help. The program starts on the 31st of May. So we are encouraging applications as soon as possible, just so you've got enough time to get set up on the platform and to do everything by the time that the program starts. So yeah, should we send it back to Mark to sign off? Anything else that you want to say?
Yeah, thanks very much, Mike, and thank you all for joining today. And it's a relatively short session. I mean, I should say that, you know, you could probably look me up on LinkedIn as well. If you have any other questions, I'm very happy to, you know, you can DM me. I'm happy to answer them in my own time as well. As I said at the start, this is I think it's a really exciting course. I'm not just saying that because I'm delivering it. It really is brand new, and I'm really thrilled that LIS have put their name behind it, because there are lots of courses out there that look at aspects of AI technology, for example, at social media, at internet culture, but there is, I don't think, anything quite like this that's around. And, you know, I'm really hopeful that we can develop this over time and make it into a even bigger course. So thanks very much for your interest, and I hope to see you on the course.
Thanks, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you.